Perennialism. Perennialism is based on a conservative view of realism. It views schools as a place to really cultivate that human intellect. It really believes that from this, our primary goals or mission is to search for and disseminate truth. But the key thing about this philosophy of education is that they believe truth is universal. It does not change. Therefore, true education is universal and does not change. So think about that for a minute. Do you believe that there's no changing in education? Do you believe that there's one and only one truth? Well, in order to prepare students for instruction in perennial classrooms, it's not that they don't encourage them to question or think critically. It's just really that they want them to think critically about the truths that are out there. So, in order to do this, they need to learn questioning strategies so they can engage in what perennialists call meaningful dialogue. There are two key frameworks for engaging students in kind of this meaningful dialogue or higher order thinking and questioning. One is Bloom's taxonomy, some of you may have heard of that, and the other are the depth of knowledge questions by Webb. So we're going to take a moment to look at these two things and see how employing these in your future professional practice might help students gain a richer insight or understanding. So in Bloom's taxonomy, we have 6 levels, and it says the most basic level is at remembering, where we ask students to recall facts and basic concepts. Then we move on to understanding, where we want them to explain ideas or concepts. Applying them is kind of that middle level, where we use information in new situations. Analyzing, where we can draw connections among ideas. Evaluating, where we can justify a stand or decision. And then finally creating, that's coming with the new producing new or original work. So as you can see, with each level of Bloom's taxonomy, it gets higher and higher and more complex. With Webb's depth of knowledge questions, there are 4 levels. They're going to go in reverse order though. So level 1, we see at the top, is again kind of aligned to that remembering level of Bloom's taxonomy, where it's recalling fact, information, procedure. The understand and apply is kind of level 2 of Webb's, whereas in Bloom's it's levels 2 and 3. But this is where you want to explore a concept, you want them to use that information. And then in level 3 of Webb's depth of knowledge, we kind of see the analyze and evaluate elements of Bloom's taxonomy. It's that strategic thinking, where it requires reasoning, developing a plan or sequence of steps. And then finally, level 4, Webb's depth of knowledge, is really kind of links to that create level of Bloom's taxonomy, where it's an extended thinking, where you have to engage in investigation, thinking about the process, multiple conditions of the problem to really get it at a higher and deeper level. So if you think about the two, Bloom's taxonomy and Webb's depth of knowledge, what ways do you see each of these playing a role in your future instructional practice? How might they help you get students to question a deeper level, and think about specifically how they might get them to engage in more meaningful dialogues if they're using either Bloom's taxonomy or Webb's depth of knowledge. I think Web depths of knowledge questions are a little bit more in depth and really kind of support the strategic questioning and thinking that perennialists are looking for, but both certainly have a role in your future professional practice. So we're going to look at a modified Socratic circle here in just a minute, but what I want to do first is have you look at Socratic seminars and learn about what these are, because there are 2 main instructional strategies used in perennialism. We're going to look at both Socratic seminars and didactic instruction. But let's start out with our Socratic seminars. And in order to do this, I'm going to minimize our screen here and pull up an example of what the Socratic method is all about.
Hi, I'm Alex for Teach Like This, and this is the Socratic method. The way the Socratic method was developed comes with this fun little anecdote. One day, the man goes to the oracle of Delphi and ask, who is the wisest man in Greece? The oracle says, Socrates. When Socrates found out, he was a little surprised. In fact, he thought it was a paradox. Wouldn't you have to be wiser than me in order to know how wise I am, in order to tell me that I'm the wisest? And thus began the Socratic question. Another strong proponent of the Socratic method is any child that discovers the question why. It's time for bed. Why? Because you need enough sleep for tomorrow. Why? Because otherwise you're going to be tired. Why? Okay, because I said so. The Socratic method is really valuable in places where students are learning ethics. This might be in a civics class, or a law class, or a history class, or just as a teachable moment as kids are playing on the playground. The primary goal of this method is not to try to have students answer unanswerable questions. It's to have them think critically about difficult issues. In order to use the Socratic method, follow these steps. Pick a controversial topic and provide questions for students, or have them develop their own questions, or develop questions as a class. The teacher is going to start out leading the discussion. However, as the year goes on, it'd be wonderful for students to start taking on the leadership role. After starting the initial open discussion, the leader's role has these following things. Keep the topic focused and don't allow tangents. Coax reluctant participants into the discussion, and limit contributions for dominating students. Force students to elaborate and clarify their contributions. As the discussion continues, at some point it's going to get confusing, so the leader's responsibility is to clarify, synthesize, and restate earlier opinions. The participants share in the responsibility of the Socratic discussion also. They must think and speak persuasively and use the discussion to support their opinion. That requires them to actively listen to the discussion in order to use it for support later. Participants must demonstrate respect for different thoughts, values, or ideas, and it's important they don't interrupt each other. The Socratic method is also used in law schools, but with a little bit of a twist. In this case, the professor calls on a student at random and puts that student on the hot seat. The student then has to answer the question and all subsequent questions that the professor asks. The professor then takes the role of devil's advocate and forces the student to defend his or her opinion as the professor keeps on coming up with refuting arguments. One hallmark of the Socratic question is there's no one right answer. As a recap, the Socratic method is a strategy that challenges students' assumptions and causes them to think critically about difficult issues. In order to do it in your classroom, start with a good open-ended question, ask follow-up questions, and then summarize everything together at the end with different thoughts and new learnings. That's all for this video. If you have additional questions, you can connect with me on Twitter, or by email, or by commenting down below. And subscribe for weekly strategies in your newsfeed. I'm Alex, and that's Teach Like This.
Okay, that was a really quick look at Socratic seminars and what they entail. So I hope you found that helpful and beneficial. But we're going to look at taking this idea of Socratic seminars and modifying it just a little bit to do what I call a modified Socratic circle. So as he described, the Socratic circle is a questioning strategy used in classrooms. Typically you'll see two circles formed in a classroom, and then the inner circle are the ones being asked the questions and responding, while the outer circle is kind of listening and taking notes. I recommend doing a modified Socratic circle, particularly at the elementary level, because it gives people a little bit more responsibility. And the way you do that is that you still have your center circle, but behind each person in the center are two people who are the wingmen or wing women. After you get into these formations, your inner circle and outer circle with two wingmen and two wing women, you're going to have depth of knowledge questions written by the students. And these depth of knowledge questions should be based on the topic you're discussing. As he mentioned in the video, these should be open-ended questions, because that's going to give you the richest discussion. And what you'll want to do is have your wingmen or wing women be prepared to take notes on every question that's discussed in the center circle. The wingmen and women can also offer support by providing written talking points and passing them forward to the people in the center circle. The key is that the wingmen and wing women cannot talk. They're only allowed to offer nonverbal support via writing, but they should constantly be writing and taking notes in the outer circle to pass forward to that inner circle. And then you switch roles as you go, so every couple of questions, your wingmen and wing women go into the center, one at a time, and then that way eventually everyone gets the circle, everyone has an active role. I really like this. I've done it several times in my own classrooms here at the university level, and I think it's very beneficial because it makes sure everyone is actively involved in critically thinking about the topic being discussed. Initially, teachers would start out with the questions, like I would write depth of knowledge questions and propose them to my students, and then as I see the students are getting the hang of it, I would have them move forward and do their own depth of knowledge questions. So I hope you like that idea of a modified Socratic circle. Now we're going to look at another approach or strategy used in perennialism. This is called didactic instruction. And the way that would work is you'd have students follow kind of more directed instructional approach. So I'm going to give you an example of that. I want you to pull out a piece of paper and divide it into two columns. You're going to have one column that says didactic or passive learning, a second column that says Socratic or active learning. We're going to compare the two. So basically you're making a T-chart. Go ahead and take a moment to do that on a blank sheet of paper, and if you need to, pause the video so you can take the notes. Alright, so now you're going to write down under each of these didactic instructions, Socratic, you're going to now take notes and write down the information that's being presented here on each side of your T-chart. You can paraphrase, but the key is to make sure you have the core information to be able to refer back to. So in didactic instruction, it's very teacher-centered. This is based on the idea that the teacher is the primary agent in learning, where Socratic is more problem-centered, based on the assumption that the student's the primary agent in learning, because the students are the one engaging in the conversation and discussion. So take a moment to write that down on your T-chart. Again, you can paraphrase, but make sure you have the concept concrete enough that you can understand it and refer back to it. If you need to, pause the video here to write down your notes. Okay, once again, we're going to our second point here. The teacher's role in a didactic approach is to impart results of experience, personal study, and reflection. Whereas the teacher's role in Socratic strategy is to uncover the question that the answer hides, or to be a co-learner with the students. You're not giving them the answer, but you're helping them discover that answer through the questioning strategies you employ. Again, take a moment to write down that information on each side of your T-chart. If you need to, pause the video, do so here. Alright, now let's go to point number 3. In didactic, the strategy is primarily deductive, meaning that the usual methods are lecture, storytelling, analogy, morphism. I'm going to show you an example of analogy here in a minute. In Socratic, on the other hand, it's primarily inductive, and the usual methods, discussion, dialogue, and problem solving. Once again, take a moment to write down the notes here. If you have any questions, pause and think a minute about what your questions are, comparing the two, and we will move on in just a moment. Alright, point number 4, the test of truth. In didactic, it's really about authority and experience. In Socratic, it's really about the ability to reason and provide evidence. So again, make sure that you have this documented on your T-chart, what the test of truth is and how they are distinct between didactic and Socratic. If you need to, pause the video and take your notes here. Okay, point 5. Learning is the reception of ideas. In didactic instruction, it's really about what are you getting from the teacher who is imparting the knowledge. In Socratic, though, learning is really about a conflict of ideas. It's a thesis, antithesis, a synthesis that results in new knowledge. So it's really about working through the information in a way that's going to help you arrive at that knowledge, whereas in didactic, it's really about just receiving that information. Once again, take notes here and pause the video if you need to. Okay, point 6, the student's role in didactic strategy is really to be passive, open, receptive, trusting and unquestioning. You are, in this one as a student, really just believing what the teacher is telling you and writing down that information, kind of like what we're doing on our teacher right now. Whereas in Socratic, the student's role is really to be active, questioning, critical, and disseminating. You really have to learn to trust your own judgment, your own thinking. That's where this depth of knowledge questions really come in, because you're getting at a higher level of knowledge based on what it is you've learned and understood. So take a moment to take notes here on the distinction between the student's role in didactic and Socratic. If you need to, pause the video. Alright, and then our next point here, evaluation, is the factual recall of data. So in didactic, I want to see what you know. I'm going to check your teacher at the end. I'm going to make sure you have all the information down. I'm going to make sure that information is correct. Whereas in Socratic, the evaluation would be the application of understanding and interpretation of the data. So I might say, what did you understand from the teacher? How would you, to see the distinction between didactic and Socratic, I'll engage you in questioning to see what you understand. Whereas didactic is more like, did you produce the information I asked you to? So again, take notes here, write down the key information to distinguish between didactic and Socratic. Alright, and then the ultimate goal is wisdom is viewed as the internalization of truths and beliefs. Sorry, that last part got cut off. But really in didactic instruction, it's really the ultimate goal of wisdom is viewed as the internalization of truths and beliefs. And the ultimate goal of wisdom in a Socratic approach or strategies is that wisdom is viewed as the informed ignorance, knowing that one does not know. So it's kind of that Socratic paradox he talked about, where Socrates questioned, how do you know I'm the most intelligent one? You would have to be the most intelligent one to know I'm the most intelligent. So it's kind of that paradox that he was talking about. So the ultimate goal, again, very different in didactic instruction versus Socratic. Make sure you take the notes on that. And then pause the video here if you need to. Alright, so again, I hope you have a good understanding of, through this little example, the difference between didactic instruction, Socratic instruction, and what a didactic strategy would look like, filling out information on a T-chart, copying it down, and then being tested on it. In a didactic approach, the teacher is going to be the ultimate authority. If we look here, we see an example of that, where the teacher in this one is talking about gravity. She says that a massive object is going to be rooted to the ground. So Miss Crum said cows were far too fat, the facts were facts, and that was that. So in her example on the board, cows cannot fly. But if we see in the window, we see pictures of cows flying around in the air. So even though she's the ultimate authority in truth and knows the information, we see a contradiction here outside the window. So what is it the students actually believe? Alright, so that kind of wraps up our discussion here on perennialism, but I do want to have a little bit of an application in practice and what this looks like in school settings for you as future teachers. So we're going to watch another coffee talk on perennialism, and hopefully get some great insights out of this.
So much for joining us for this coffee talk. I'd like to welcome Dr. David Allen, who's going to be the Director of Field Experience with the MAP program. I'm very excited as well to have him share some information with us on perennialism. But first, I'm going to
Actually, Dr. Allen's no longer the Director of Field Experiences, but he is still working at the College of Education and has some great insights that he will be sharing with us. So let me continue on with his video.
introduce himself to you and tell you a little bit about his background.
Hello, my name is David Allen. I'm the Director of Field Experiences. I'm also a math educator, so I teach in our graduate program students who are looking to have a degree in mathematics education. I also have taught undergraduate math education, teaching teachers how to teach math, and will be involved in your field experience a little bit. We'll be changing the field experience in the fall. Also, I'll be arranging your student teaching placements, so I intend to call each of you and have a personal conversation with you placement is what suits your needs best.
Eileen Weitzberger is now the person who's going to be doing this for you. She is the one in charge of field experiences placements.
Great. I know they're all looking forward to that. We have several who are paraprofessionals in the program inside of working in schools and districts, and I know they're eager to get to that stage of their program. But now that we're in the very first course, they're just learning some basic background information about the foundations of education. And I know we talked a little bit about the importance of perennialism and how that may not have a significant role in education today, but still does play a role somewhat, particularly when it comes to mathematics.
Sure, I actually think it plays a pretty significant role in mathematics. As we have gone through a variety of change in educational reform, the TIAC wrote a book called Tinkering Towards Utopia, and in that book they said that layers of reform are built upon each other, but there's always these truisms that maintain the practice of teachers. And unfortunately, I think perennialism is one of those. And I say unfortunately because you can think about your own experience in learning mathematics. When you think of perennialism, you think of this idea that there's these universal truths. Well, in mathematics, we certainly have facts that we teach that don't change. They're unchanging facts. And so what happens is, there's always 180 degrees in the sum of the angles of any triangle, and always 180 degrees, right? Well, that's something that people teach rather than allowing students to have the opportunity to discover. And there's a number of different ways that with explorations and activities that you can help students determine why that's true or what that means. But unfortunately, it's easier. Another example is the idea of multiplying integers. When you think about positive times positive is positive, positive times negative is negative. Well, rather than teach students why that's true, we have a tendency just to say this is a convention in mathematics, and we just want you to remember this. So much of our knowledge in mathematics becomes remembered knowledge. Well, the problem with remembered knowledge is that you can forget remembered knowledge. So this emphasis of didactic instruction, where we just focus on delivering content, we think of students' brains as sponges that absorb all of this information. And you can think about this: if you take a sponge and you fill it with water, what happens? It sits there. Until the water drips out. Well, then it's like in a classroom, you take a test. Well, a test would be like squeezing the sponge. All the water comes out, so the students are tested, they're recorded, and they get graded. Well, then what happens? You release the sponge, and it expands again, but it doesn't take any water back in. So now you're teaching a new set of knowledge, and you're trying to fill that sponge again, based upon what? Nothing. The water's gone. So perennialism is one of those things that has maintained kind of a presence in our schools. Now, on the reverse side of that, why is that a problem? Because with our college and career readiness standards in the state of Kansas, our Common Core standards, we're teaching kids to be flexible in their thinking. We want them to be well qualified, not to access a particular knowledge set, but how to use that particular knowledge set to discover new ideas and new things. If you think about what we're preparing students for, the jobs we're preparing students for in the future aren't even created yet. So with the exponential growth in technology and the exponential growth in just our society, the way we interact around technology to accomplish our tasks. Unfortunately, truisms that we have taught for a long time are not going to be effective. To think about this, just to leave you with a little point. You teach a student that the sum of degrees in a regular triangle are always 180 degrees. I would challenge you to draw a triangle on an orange and measure the sum of the angles, interior angles of the triangle on an orange, or some other round, a ball, for example. And you'll find that the sum of the interior angles of the triangle are not 180 degrees. So, think about that. Think about the knowledge that you believe can be true, teach your students, but help them to access that knowledge for the purpose of discovering new knowledge. So,
Great. I think that's a wonderful point to move on. I really appreciate your insight when it comes to this because I think we get stuck in one construction of thinking and really with perennialism there is, that idea of the universal truth. And as you said, the way we teach the going to look at it is a new perspective.
it does give us a new perspective. So,
Thank you, Dr. Allen.
well, thanks for listening to me, and I will be in touch with each of you.
Alright, I hope you found that helpful in terms of math and how perennialism kind of takes that universal truth approach. As Dr. Allen demonstrated with his examples, there are some universal truths that we just can't argue, but how we go about teaching those truths is what's going to distinguish one philosophy of education from another. So let's actually look at our next